Hello, everybody. Welcome to Chloethedev Unfiltered. I'll be going through another paper review today, continuing with the Ethereum 2.0 economic review. And so, over the past couple of weeks, I've been going through the economic review and obviously starting with the beginning, and we've gotten all the way now down to chapter 9, economic attack vectors. It is a pretty short chapter, about 10 pages, and so I gotta take the dog out soon. So that's just perfect. So we're heading down to page 56 to get started. Here we go. So let's just get started and make sure it's streaming well. And yeah, if you have any questions, concerns, comments, please leave them in the comments. Feel free to follow and subscribe to the channel. I only really care about followers because at 1,000 followers, I can go live from my phone, which seems easier than trying to emulate my screen. But anyways, Chapter 9, Economic Attack Vectors. We identify two main categories of economic attack vectors, each with variance and differing levels of risk. You have supermajority attacks and finality attacks. For the purpose of this paper, we do not cover all known attacks exhaustively. We also do not spend time on attack vectors that stem from technological sources such as networking-based attacks, random number generator RNG manipulation, rogue key attacks, software bug-driven blackmail attacks, etc. Lastly, our intention is not to mathematically define the conditions of these attacks, but rather to provide an overview for further exploration. Ultimately, in this section, we attempt to find a minimally viable level of ETH staked, the ETH stake rate, to ensure network security. I'm actually going to make this a bit bigger. So I can read it a bit easier. Okay. Supermajority attacks. The first attack that we consider the closest counterpart to a 51% attack in POW blockchains like ETH1. Is what we consider the closest counterpart to a 51% attack in POW blockchains like ETH1. As opposed to POW, which is proof of work security models, finalization of the POS, proof of stake chain ETH2, requires a 2/3 majority of validators to vote on checkpoints. Because ETH2 relies on pseudo-random shuffling of validators into committees for security, there are strong security guarantees against the supermajority control by individuals with less than 2/3 of the validating stake, simply meaning that because of this random generation of numbers, as long as these numbers are actually random before the committees are chosen, it would be very, very difficult to collude and try and get that get control of the network without actually having 2/3 of the network, because the only other way to do it would be collusion, which is arguably impossible with random numbers if it's truly random. For example, we can show with a binomial distribution that sampling from a large enough validator set, at least the 16,384 validators required for the beacon chain launch, where a validator controls 1/3 of the validator stake, there's a 1 in 1 trillion chance that the validator obtains a supermajority. So you could see how with the 2/3 level, your chance would be, I guess, arguably quite high, potentially 100% if you could just get in there with 2/3. But at 1/3, it's 1 in a trillion. So you can see how the probability of being able to attack the network is just diminishingly smaller, I guess, as your total validator control is lower. This property holds even at larger stakes of ETH, effectively making it near impossible to corrupt the consensus mechanism up to 2/3 of all validating stake. As a result, whenever I start going live and talking to a screen, I start yawning and getting tired. As a result, the naive form of the supermajority attack is to simply acquire and stake 2/3 of the total ETH staked, or to collude with other validators to accomplish the same result. By obtaining control of a supermajority of the stake, so supermajority just being 2/3 or more, a validator could hypothetically execute a double spend in later phases of ETH2 by censoring whistleblowers. In phase 0, however, given the lack of transactions between addresses and the lack of withdrawals, this attack is likely not profitable. And what I enjoy about this is that it gives, between phases 0 and phase 2, where transactions are included in the chain, it gives, potentially a few months or a few years of experimentation to ensure, this 2/3 state collusion attack vector is not something that will hopefully affect Ethereum 2 stakers or Ethereum 2 in general, because right now the attack isn't very profitable. So even if you could figure out the attack, you get slashed probably with real ETH and it wouldn't be very profitable. But I'm sure we will see more research on these attacks as we get closer to phase 1, phase 2. A more sophisticated version of this attack would involve bribery, where validators are incentivized to vote for blocks proposed by the attacker through a smart contract mechanism that distributes rewards that are slightly higher than the system rewards. In phase 0, this could not happen on ETH2, but an attacker could leverage ETH1 to distribute payments to validators who post signed receipts of their attestations on the ETH2 blockchain. Very interesting. I didn't even know this was a proposed attack vector, and I'm not even sure why, but I'm sure we'll see that shortly. For example, if a validator wants to gain 10% more control of ETH staked than ETH2, they could offer 10x the amount of rewards issued on ETH2 to validators who attest to their blocks. Actually, okay, so now that they're explaining it, this does make a lot of sense. It is a pretty, large issue. As we said before, you can't rely on altruistic nodes or what do they call it? Yield apathetic validators to run a network, because most validators are going to be capital efficient validators. And so with this type of a system where someone's like, oh, I'm willing to offer you 10x the rewards if you prove that you've attested to my blocks, and I'll pay you out on ETH1, for example, or an NETH or RETH or whatever way they pay you. A lot of capital efficient validators might just say, okay, like, hey, although to be fair, if there was risk of being slashed, you wouldn't want to propose or attest to anything like that. But let's say someone had a pretty good reputation. They've been offering this service for 6 months or a year, and and then 2/3 of the network was actually attesting to blocks on this third-party service and not blocks based on the consensus mechanism for ETH2. That would pose a really big issue, because then someone can just hack this reputable service, offer some new block that will cause a double spend, and then either the double spend would happen and everyone else gets slashed, or some other large issue. But again, I feel like a lot of the issues will be things that are able to be seen, but a powerful and smart attacker would do all this in the background and potentially not get caught. Doing this for one whole day at an average price of $200 would only cost the validator between $90,000, assuming only 1 million ETH already staked, and $500,000, assuming the validator, I guess, already had 33 million ETH staked. This is saying, sorry, this is the amount staked in network totally. So it has a max cost of this attack of like $500,000, assuming 33 million ETH staked, which is like almost a third of total ETH currently. So, I mean, that's a pretty low cost to attack the network, which is far less expensive than the cost of acquiring an additional 10% of the ETH at that price. There are, of course, several challenges to this approach, from the dependency on the central actor in ETH1 to the emotional motives of many ETH2 Phase 0 participants who are not expected to be as easily swayed by bribes. Again, early participants are probably going to be more yield apathetic, more altruistic, and later participants with a higher amount of ETH are probably more capital efficient. But anyways. In later phases, however, it may be feasible to offer higher bribes on the order of 100x the rewards, with smart contract mechanisms for disbursement inside of ETH2 for shorter periods of time. So this is talking about now how on ETH2, once transactions are allowed to be sent, with the network being 33 million ETH staked, so at a strong, secure network with ETH at 200, which is a low price. So let's assume ETH at 400, which is at now. You're looking at 1.2 million, let's assume, to give 100x rewards over 3 hours. And I would assume that most capital efficient validators would be perfectly okay with getting 100 extra rewards just for 3 hours to attest to a reputable attester's stake. So we'll see how that goes as we get closer to ETH2 Phase 2. Security framework application. To evaluate the validity and feasibility of this attack, we assess it against our security framework defined in Section 4. As a refresher, the requirements for security we defined were as follows. The cost of attack on the beacon chain must be equal or greater to the economic gain derived from the attack, which seems like this second attack would be not following that same proposal. And secondly, the cost of the attack on the beacon chain must be equal or greater to the cost of an equal or corresponding attack on the ETH1 chain. Again, this second attack here, which seems harder to evaluate, seems like it would invalidate both of these proposals. But in phase 0, we can say with confidence that a supermajority attack does not satisfy condition 1, and there is no way to successfully execute a double spend attack. Or for that matter, any kind of transaction, which is, safety, no transactions, let's take it slow. Moreover, and we saw a hack with Harvest Finance just this morning or last night, or not even a hack, an exploit. But it doesn't matter what you call it. The point is, there was an exploit and LPs, liquidity providers, were hurt by it. So if there's an exploit on ETH2 because of transactions or whatever, it doesn't matter if it's a hack or an exploit or whatever you want to call it. The point is, it's LPs that are hurt. People who are providing liquidity for security, and that is people who are staking ETH. In my opinion, it's the exact same thing. If you are an LP, if you are staking, it is all the same. You are putting up some sort of capital, some sort of liquidity, some sort of economic assets to secure the network or provide some sort of service that you are getting paid some sort of fees for. And the risk of losing those assets is high in a lot of these new systems. So it's important to do these things safely. Moreover, by simply accumulating 2/3 of the rewards and censoring whistleblowers, it would take several years to make up the amount of money spent to acquire the supermajority stake, assuming the price of ETH stays constant. Not only is it unlikely that the price of ETH stays constant given the attack, we would expect it to crash, but by all accounts, validators would fork the ETH2 chain to freeze out the attacker. So, what they're saying is it's really hard to get that 2/3 stake required. Even if you did attack the network like that, ETH would probably crash, so it wouldn't even be economically viable in that sense. And you'd probably lose your stake and other things like that. You could censor whistleblowers and get your money back. Because if you don't censor whistleblowers, you lose your stake. If you censored whistleblowers, people would just fork the chain, and then your chain would be worthless. Yeah, but in my opinion, the larger issue, what I see happening is someone just shorting ETH2, performing this sort of attack, and making money on Bitcoin, making Bitcoin. Not everyone cares about making ETH. The Harvest Finance attacker, used decentralized finance on Ethereum to exploit a application, but then they used Ren BTC and Tornado Cash and all that, but they exited on Bitcoin. And so I think that what Bitcoin could really show its use case for is being the central pot of finance, and all these other chains can port over to Bitcoin being this central pot. And Ethereum could be that central pot too, but I guess it depends where the larger market cap is. Once transactions and smart contracts are enabled in ETH2, this attack could feasibly become more of a concern, and I definitely see it becoming a very large concern once transactions and smart contracts are allowed, as a double spend could potentially be quickly executed. To gauge the relative difficulty of such an attack at that stage, we consider the second clause. So this is now where we're talking about an attack and how much it would cost you, and then how much it would cost you on ETH1. Let's see. Let's just see. In Exhibit 37, we show the cost of an attack of a 51% attack on ETH1, which we compare to the cost of a supermajority attack on ETH2 in Exhibit 36. So again, these are all mostly useless numbers because ETH isn't anywhere near that. But I'm just going to look at the last two columns of the graph with ETH at 500 and ETH at 1,000. Because ETH right now is close to 500, or it's at 400, I think, or something like that. And, one could hope that over the next few months we'll see ETH at 1,000. So this is the cost of attack in millions. And what it's saying is that at the ETH price of 500, the cost of attack, it's actually kind of funny. The cost of attack in ETH1 stays the same regardless of the price of ETH. It's pretty much the network hash rate that changes the price, which I think is very interesting and doesn't really provide for an efficient network security metrics, I guess, if you're looking at a graph. I mean, it's pretty clear. No matter what you do, all that matters, no matter what the price of ETH, you're not gaining more security necessarily by the price of ETH going up. Whereas in ETH2, I think one of the coolest aspects for me personally as, as an investor, as someone who wants to build on top of ETH2, is the fact that as the ETH2 price goes up, the ETH2 network is gaining security. It's not just about a hash rate anymore and computers going online and wasting electricity. It's about more. On the left-hand side of the graph, you can see the cost of attack will go up with the amount of ETH staked as well as the price of ETH, which makes sense. In Exhibit 37, we show the cost of attack, blah, blah. We model the ETH1 attack cost against network hash rate. We estimate the relevant range to be 100,000 gigahashes per second to 250,000 gigahashes per second, as the Ethereum hash rate over the last 2.5 years has oscillated between those endpoints. Because of the close relationship between price and security in ETH2's proof of stake model, the reader will notice at low prices of ETH, it is typically much cheaper to execute a supermajority attack on ETH2 than to execute a 51% attack on ETH1. And so that's just showing here how pretty much at the ETH $500 range, with a low amount of ETH staked, it is not as secure as ETH1. But I mean, regardless of the amount of ETH staked, up in this first chart, in the very first column, at the very first start of the beacon chain at 524,288 ETH staked, and at a base ETH price of $1,000, it is already more secure than ETH1 at a low hash rate. And now reasonably, you wouldn't expect ETH1 to be at a low hash rate like that. But again, as you get more ETH staked, you quickly get more security. The dog's going to have to go out soon. I'm not even sure I'm going to make it to this whole chapter. Actually, you know what? I'm going to make it the chapter. I'm going to read it quickly and make it through the chapter. And here's a graph just showing the comparison on one graph together, showing where the sweet spots are. So we hit that sweet spot once we start getting around, 3 million, 4 million ETH staked on ETH2, and with the ETH price being, between 300, once we get to around 5-7 million, and $1,000 per ETH once we get around, it will only take around 2 million. Yes, she probably saw a bunny or something. To model cost of attack, okay, no, we're not reading through that. Once again, in phase 0, this is not expected to be a major concern. However, starting in phase 2, assuming the presence of a DeFi ecosystem on ETH2 or some level of cross-chain linkages with the existing DeFi ecosystem on ETH1, Mika, you can bark all day. Yeah? You want to go chase the bunnies and the squirrels? No, Mika. No, you can come say hi, though. You come say hi? No, you just want to argue and fight and get mad and all that fun stuff? Okay, let's see. Okay, we can envision large-scale borrowing contribution to launch supermajority attacks in ETH2, as opposed to ETH1's POW's proof-of-work system, where mounting enough hash power to perform 4% attack may take many, many months. It was very hard to kind of take over in terms of hash power. This would likely be easier to detect. Amassing stake through borrowing and becoming a validator can be accomplished in a much shorter amount of time. So again, cost of borrowing might be high or low, but in the attacks above, if in some DeFi platform, think about flash loans, what you could accomplish in one transaction. Think about flash loans for like borrowing attestations of validators. So you can borrow, let's say, in one transaction, in one Ethereum one transaction, let's say you could borrow and pay the fees and flash loan, a bunch of attestations or something like that. And as long as your flash loan paid the attesters, you'd be fine. And so there's, I'm sure, some crazy fun things that'd be coming out. And this, so the sweet spot is right here apparently at, 12.5 million ETH staked and a little bit under $2,000. Yeah. So, oh no, sorry. This is the cost of attack at an ETH price of $200. Sorry, I was just looking at it like, oh, look at that. So yeah. And then again, cost of attack on ETH1 versus ETH2 at different prices. Honestly, this is all just this graph right here shown in different ways with specific variables, so it's easier to see what the cost of attack is going to look like, what the cost of attack on ETH1 would look like, ETH2, and how to kind of go around that. In summary, in phase 0, condition 1 of the framework is not satisfied, while condition 2 can be satisfied at certain prices of ETH and total ETH staked. In later phases, we expect both conditions could be satisfied. Although we expect both price and ETH stake to increase in later phases when there is more certainty around the security properties of the network and an ability to extract gains from the system. As a result, we emphasize the need for a sufficient amount of ETH stake. So this is kind of like the point, right? This is kind of what we're getting down to, but the main idea is that, with a lot of ETH staked, a lot of these issues kind of aren't as big of a deal, and as well as the price of ETH goes up, a lot of the security issues aren't as big of a deal. So it shows that it's important to make sure the economics behind Ethereum 2 are viable. As a result, we realize the need for someone to ETH staked. This, in turn, we expect will be a function of the expected yields for stakers. As noted in the previous section, according to Exhibit 38 and the underlying data tables in our model, if we assume the minimum ETH price since 2018 was $82, and the average hash rate since Constantinople hard fork was 172,000 gigahashes per second, we obtain a cost of attack that suggests a minimum requirement of 13.8 ETH stake rate, which we term our ETH target take rate. So again, they're just taking general averages and saying that it seems as though if 13.8% of total ETH is staked, we're looking at a pretty secure network, and that's what we're going for. Finality attacks. This second category of attacks is original to POS systems and is directly what are you doing? It is directly tied to their finality properties, whereas proof of work systems are probabilistically deterministic. Proof of stake can offer economic finality. However, with that property comes new attacks that are possible in ETH2. The ETH2 proof of stake consensus algorithm is designed with a strong 2/3 honest majority assumption in mind. This does not mean that the system cannot operate without an honest supermajority, but that it is but that is the threshold where finality is challenged. We already know that a supermajority attack requires 2/3 malicious validator stake under naive conditions, yet in the space between 1/3 and 2/3 of stake, a validator can execute a finality attack, which is important. We'll look at a few variants of this attack. Mika, can you please stop? There's nothing to play. We're not going to go play right now. Okay, we can go play after. She's one needy little puppy. But, okay. In the most naive and least destructive form of this attack, an attacker controls just over 1/3 of the validating stake and decides to keep the validators offline or effectively not participate in the consensus. By doing so, the chain can no longer finalize. I think this is one of potentially a very a large attack vector, because with DeFi applications, you could just say, okay, you know what, I'm going to borrow these own this stake, start staking for a while, and then just not finalize, which would lead the chain to get to a state of non-finality. The chain will still run, but then, in my opinion, you'd be able to perform a lot more double spends without having any finality. I'm not sure exactly how the attack would work, but it seems like it would be a viable attack with only 1/3 of the stake. By doing so, the chain can no longer finalize as it relies on 2/3 supermajority to attain finality. We saw that on Madasha recently. As mentioned previously, after 4 epochs in this state, the chain enters leak mode. And this is what happened on Madasha as well, where there was an inactivity leak where inactivity penalties are dealt to offline validators. These penalties increase quadratically until offline validators hit an effective balance of 16 ETH and are forced to exit the chain. So I guess luckily my validator didn't go that low, but it was definitely dropping on my first validator I had running. Once the offline validators are hit with a penalty, they immediately lose their 1/3 share of total stake, and the chain can resume finalizing. For our purposes, we will assume the attacker has 41.67% of ETH staked under control, which should allow for about 1 week of non-finality. From this behavior, we expect the attacker can gain in 2 ways. So for example, this is an attack that can happen, but we haven't really talked about how to actually gain from this attack yet. First, by preventing finalization, attestations cannot reach supermajority and blocks cannot be finalized. We've gone through that, which means that block rewards tied to finalization are not allocated. Interesting. Second, we expect the inactivity leak to create downward pressure on the ETH price. I think this is, again, where you see a lot of the attack vectors, I think, are going to be things where people are attacking ETH2 as a network in order to bring down the price and short it. Both of these factors, primarily at already low prices of ETH, could lead to unprofitable conditions for validators and discourage them from participating in validation. Very true as well. If ETH is already at a low price and something like this happened, it could push people to not want to validate anymore, not make it economically viable, and lower the total network security of Ethereum 2. Mika, no, we're not going out until I finish because you always make me stop. I always have to stop. No, I always have to stop and take you out. Not today. You're going to have to wait. I'm sorry. Okay, this outcome has 2 results. First, by reducing the ETH price stake, the attacker can now execute a supermajority attack. Again, because ETH is being burned or lost in inactivity leak, now the attacker can execute a supermajority attack by having more of the stake. In Exhibit 41, we take a starting price assuming... Mika, stop. Come. Okay, we are not going. Okay? She's literally sitting here begging me to go. And she knows that we will go, but not right now. In Exhibit 41, we take a starting price assumption of $200 ETH and 2 million ETH staked. One can see that if there's enough downward pressure on price of ETH staked, the cost of executing a finality attack followed by a supermajority attack is lower than just executing a supermajority attack. See, we have a bunch of graphs and a bunch of random analysis. Oh my gosh. Wait. No, that should be chapter 10. I thought it was only... Where is it? Oh yeah. Chapter 10 is right here. So a few graphs and we're good to go. Okay. Exhibit 41, cost of attack differential. And this is saying you cause a finality attack, then a supermajority attack, just making a more complex attack and explaining what the cost difference would be and how to get into it. The second results bring us to a variant of the finality attack. In this case, the attacker uses extra protocol mechanisms to gain from the attack. More specifically, we refer back to our expectation that phase 0, given the lack of a two-way bridge between ETH2 and ETH1, and the inability to extract staking rewards will engender burgeoning derivatives ecosystem. Man, We're just talking about there's going to be derivatives. Why gotta use all these big words? There's going to be a derivatives ecosystem that exists for ETH2. Okay. Not only do we expect new ETH generated by ETH2 to be tokenized and traded at a discount, we also expect an options ecosystem to develop. Awesome. In this case, an attacker could purchase put options on ETH2, ETH, assuming a certain options price, and use a finality attack to cause downward pressure on the price of ETH. Yes. Gaining from the spread. Yes. Many ways to, we're going to hurt the network and short it and attack. This attack makes at least two substantial assumptions: a large enough option trading system, which I'm sure we'll see, to purchase several hundred thousand of options contracts, and options prices that make sense from a profitability standpoint. I'm sure, yeah. Today, the first assumption would be challenging given global daily ETH. Oh my gosh, options volumes mostly hover around the single-digit millions USD. Kind of confused because it seems like it says here large hundreds of thousands. It says a large enough options trading ecosystem to purchase several hundreds of thousands of options contracts. Oh, they're saying the daily volume for ETH options is in the single digit of millions. Still, though, I would suggest that if your daily volume is, say, 1 to 9 million, that's probably enough volume to buy $500 to $9,000 of volume of contracts. But you might have some slippage, and it might not be worth it economically, and who knows. But again, assuming that we're not doing this until phase 2, and I don't know. Again, a lot of assumptions. So many, and that's the hard part with phase 2, with ETH2 not being out yet. There's so many assumptions that have to be made with these papers. And I think it's very difficult to really dig into it without some concrete evidence, which we're going to get hopefully soon in the Beacon Chain launch on mainnet. Security framework application. Similarly to supermajority attacks, we are not overly confident with naive finality attacks in phase 0. In this phase, a finality attack is more likely to come from a non-economically motivated actor trying to sabotage the system rather than an actor motivated profit. I would 100% agree with that. In phase 0, we expect condition 1 to hold, agreed, personally, as there is no effective way to gain from an attack. Condition 2 is thus irrelevant. In later phases where supermajority attacks become profitable, scenarios exist where condition 1 no longer holds. Yep. Moreover, condition 2 would not hold under some scenarios where ETH price and ETH stake decreases sufficiently. Again, I mean, you're going to get into a paper, a graph explaining that. Same assumptions as before. And this is saying mainly that if it's under 7.5 million ETH staked, that's when you really have your the network being susceptible to attack. But again, with large numbers of ETH staked, the attack on the network really does cost more than is economically viable for most attackers. Extra protocol attacks noted above depend primarily on the existing options environment. As noted in Exhibit 43 below, under certain put option prices and ETH price reductions, it is possible to make a profit breaking condition 1. So again, we're talking now about potentially attacking the network in general and shorting the price of ETH. And this is even possible in phase 0. Moreover, while condition 2 is less directly relevant, it also breaks. No. It also breaks in this scenario if compared to a 51% attack. And then, again, I'm not going to be going through all these graphs, but you can start looking into the strike, the options price and the strike price and what's the price of ETH. And I mean, looking at ETH below 200 and 150 seems a bit extreme. But again, I think it's very important to go through these numbers and see what would it look like if something like this happened. I mean, it is possible for ETH and Bitcoin and all these coins to go down by half. What would happen? What would it look like? We should take note that, like supermajority attacks, finality attacks can also be enhanced through bribery. Finally, we expect several variants of the above attacks to be possible, and we encourage further exploration among these lines, particularly in terms of formally identifying the parameters under which security breaks in non-naive scenarios. And I think that's really going to be fun. The non-naive scenarios of trying to take over some nodes. Takeaways, quickly, so I can get out and take the dog out. In phase 0, we are primarily concerned with attacks that aim to sabotage the network. and that would take down the ETH price. We find the network is at risk of sustaining such attacks, but are less concerned about their long-term impact. One key attack to look out for in phase 0 is an extra protocol finality attack. In later phases, economically rational attackers can pull off brute force economic attacks less expensively than ETH1 on a low ETH price and ETH stake scenarios. We believe the system should be architected to sustain the most destructive economic attacks. As a result, it should be able to bear supermajority attacks at low prices of ETH. We calculate that the target ETH stake rate sustained attacks is 13.8%. So if we hit that percent, low ETH prices shouldn't matter as much in terms of security. We should note that for further security under drastic conditions, such as an extreme drop in price, higher levels of ETH stake should be targeted. Chapter 10. Okay, I'm gonna head off now, dog. I'm gonna go skate around the river with the dog. Hope someone knows something new. Read the paper yourself if you enjoyed it. And heading out. Thanks everyone who might have ended up listening to some.